What happens when a beloved Hollywood hero, a man who's charmed the world with his grit and grace, steps onto a stage expecting a friendly chat, only to be ambushed by a host with a venomous agenda? Matt Damon, the star who's carried films and hearts for decades, walked into Jimmy Kimmel's studio that night with a smile, ready to talk about his latest project, a film about veterans rebuilding their lives. But Kimmel, with his sharp tongue and a grudge as old as their so-called feud, had other plans. The air crackled with danger before a single word was spoken, the audience sensing a storm brewing. Matt, dressed in a simple navy suit, shook Kimmel's hand, but the host's grip was too tight, his smirk too sly. The crowd, packed into the seats, murmured, their excitement tinged with unease. They'd come for laughs, but what they got was a showdown that would burn through the airwaves, a clash of egos and truths that nobody saw coming. Matt took his seat, his jaw tight, unaware that Kimmel was about to drag up a wound from years past, one that Matt had buried deep, thinking it was forgotten. But Kimmel, hungry for ratings and fueled by a personal slight, was ready to rip that wound wide open, and he didn't care who got hurt. The show began with Kimmel's usual grin, but his eyes glinted with something darker. He leaned forward, ignoring the script, and said, "So, Matt, you're here to talk about your new movie, but let's get real. You've been dodging me for years, haven't you?" The audience laughed, thinking it was a joke, part of their fake feud. But Matt's smile faltered. He tilted his head, confused, and replied, "Dodging you? I'm right here, Jimmy." Kimmel's laugh was sharp, like a blade. "Oh, come on, you know what I mean. That charity event in 2010. You bailed on my speech, left me looking like a fool in front of everyone. You think you're too good for me, don't you?" The crowd gasped, the mood shifting. Matt's face hardened. The charity event was a sore spot, one Kimmel was twisting for his own gain. Back then, Matt had left early to visit a sick friend, a fact he'd kept private out of respect. He hadn't told anyone, not even Kimmel, who'd been left to ramble, alone on stage. But Kimmel wasn't interested in the truth. He wanted blood, and he wanted it live. Matt leaned back, his voice low but firm. "You're bringing that up now, after 15 years? I had a reason, Jimmy, and it wasn't about you." Kimmel scoffed, cutting him off. "A reason? Sure, like you've got reasons for everything. Always the golden boy, never the one who's wrong." The audience oohed, egged on by Kimmel's taunt. Matt's hands clenched on the armrests, his knuckles white. He wasn't here to fight, but Kimmel was pushing him to the edge. "You don't know what you're talking about," Matt said, his voice steady but laced with warning. Kimmel leaned closer, his grin gone. "Oh, I know plenty. I know you think you're above everyone, waltzing in here like you own the place. You didn't even apologize for that night, did you?" Matt's eyes narrowed. He hadn't apologized, because there was no need, but Kimmel was painting him as the villain, and the crowd was eating it up. The tension was thick, the air heavy with unspoken grudges. Matt tried to steer the conversation back to his movie, saying, "Look, I'm here to talk about the veterans, the real heroes. Can we focus on that?" But Kimmel wasn't letting go. "Veterans, huh? Funny how you pick and choose your causes. Matt, where were you when I needed you to show up?" The accusation stung, and Matt's patience snapped. He stood, towering over the desk, his voice rising. "You want to do this, Jimmy? Fine. Let's talk about how you've been milking this fake feud for years, making it personal when it never was. You're the one who can't let go." The crowd roared, split between cheers and gasps. Kimmel's face flushed, his plan backfiring. He'd wanted to humiliate Matt, but now the star was fighting back, and the show was spiraling out of control. As the cameras rolled, the argument was just beginning, and neither man was backing down. Matt Damon's shadow loomed over the desk, his eyes locked on Jimmy Kimmel, who sat back, feigning calm but betrayed by the twitch in his jaw. The audience, caught in the crossfire, held their breath, their cheers fading into a tense hush. Matt's voice, raw with anger, cut through the silence. You think you can drag up the past and twist it to make me look bad? You're pathetic, Jimmy. Kimmel's eyes flashed, his composure cracking. He shoved his chair back and stood, leveling with Matt, his voice dripping with scorn. Pathetic? That's rich, coming from a guy who runs from his mistakes. You left me hanging at that event, and you didn't even care. Matt shook his head, his laugh bitter. You're still on that? I told you I had a reason. But you don't want the truth, do you? You just want your moment. The crowd murmured, sensing the fight was personal now, deeper than a staged feud. Kimmel paced a step, his hands slicing the air. Truth? Don't lecture me about truth, Damon. You're all about your image, your perfect little life. You think? You're better than me, always have. Matt's face tightened, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Better than you? I don't need to tear people down to feel good. Unlike some. The jab landed and Kimmel's face reddened. He leaned over the desk, pointing a finger inches from Matt's chest. You're a fake, and I'm calling you out. You bailed on that charity because you didn't care about it, or me, or anyone but yourself. The lie was bold, and the audience gasped, some booing, unsure who to side with. Matt stepped closer, his voice steady but fierce. You're full of it, Jimmy. I left because a friend was dying. You hear that? Dying. I didn't tell you because it wasn't your business, but you're making it everyone's now. The revelation hit the room like a shockwave. The crowd's boos turned to whispers, their loyalty shifting. Kimmel faltered, his mouth opening, but no words came. Matt pressed on, his anger spilling over. You want to talk about caring? Where were you when I was raising money for that hospital? Oh, right. You were too busy making jokes about me on your show. Kimmel recovered, his sneer returning. Don't play the saint, Matt. You're no hero. You're just a guy who's good at pretending. The air was electric, the argument teetering on the edge of chaos. A producer in the wings signaled to cut to commercial, but Kimmel waved them off, his ego too bruised to stop. He turned to the audience, his voice loud and mocking. You see this guy? Thinks he's untouchable. Let's hear it, folks. Who's with me? A few cheers rose, but most of the crowd stayed silent, their eyes on Matt, who stood his ground. He didn't flinch, didn't back down. You're digging your own grave, Jimmy, he said, his voice calm but lethal. Keep talking, and you'll bury yourself. Kimmel laughed, but it was forced, his confidence shaken. He grabbed a note card from the desk, pretending to read. Let's move on, huh? Tell us about your movie, hero. Or is that too hard for you? Matt's eyes burned with defiance. He sat down, but not in defeat. He leaned forward, his voice clear and cutting. You want to talk about the movie? Fine. It's about people who fight for what's right, even when the world's against them. Something you wouldn't understand. The crowd erupted, clapping for Matt, their support swinging in his favor. Kimmel's smile twisted, his plan unraveling. He'd wanted to break Matt, but the star was turning the tables, exposing Kimmel's bitterness for all to see. As the argument raged on, the stage felt smaller, the two men locked in a battle neither would easily forget. Matt was ready to fight, and Kimmel was running out of moves. The studio air was thick with defiance, Matt Damon's words hanging like a challenge as the audience's cheers for him echoed off the walls. Jimmy Kimmel, his face a mask of forced confidence, gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles pale. Matt's jab about the movie's heroes had struck deep, exposing Kimmel's petty vendetta to the crowd. But Kimmel wasn't done. He tossed the note card aside, his voice sharp and mocking. Oh, big speech, Matt. You think you can win them over with your sob stories? I know who you really are. Matt's eyes narrowed, his body tense, ready for the next blow. And who's that, Jimmy? Go on, tell them. You're so good at making things up. The crowd stirred, their murmurs growing louder, sensing the fight was far from over. Kimmel paced behind his desk, his movements jerky, like a man losing control. "You're a guy who picks his battles when it suits him," he snapped. "Always. The star, never the one who sticks around when things get messy. Like that charity. You left me to clean up your mess, and now you're acting like I'm the bad guy?" Matt's laugh was cold, cutting through Kimmel's rant. "Clean up my mess? You turned a private moment into your personal soapbox, Jimmy. You're not the victim here." The audience clapped, their support for Matt growing stronger, but Kimmel ignored them, his voice rising. "Private moment? You humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. You think you can just walk away from that?" Matt stood again, his presence commanding, his voice steady but fierce. "Humiliated you? You're humiliating yourself right now, dragging this out for the world to see. I didn't owe you an explanation then, and I don't now." Kimmel's eyes blazed, his temper slipping. He stepped around the desk, closing the gap between them, his finger jabbing the air. "You owed me respect, Damon. But you're too full of yourself to give it." Matt didn't flinch, his voice low and dangerous. "Respect? You lost that when you decided to attack me for no reason. You're not getting my respect. You're getting my honesty." The crowd roared, their cheers drowning out Kimmel's next words, forcing him to shout. "Honesty? That's a joke. You're just playing the hero, like always." The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every word. A stagehand hovered near the edge of the set, whispering to a producer, but Kimmel waved them away, his focus locked on Matt. He leaned in, his voice a venomous hiss. "You want to talk honesty? Let's talk about how you've been coasting on your charm for years, while guys like me have to claw our way up. You don't know what it's like to struggle." Matt's face darkened, his patience gone. "Struggle? Don't you dare. I've worked for everything I have, and I don't need to tear people down to prove it. You're the one who's coasting, Jimmy, riding this fake feud because it's all you've got." The audience gasped, then cheered, their loyalty now firmly with Matt. Kimmel's jaw clenched, his plan in tatters. He'd wanted to break Matt, to make him crumble on live TV, but Matt was unyielding, turning every attack back on him. Desperate, Kimmel grabbed a photo from his desk, a grainy shot from that 2010 charity event, showing Matt leaving the venue. He held it up, his voice triumphant. "See this? Proof you walked out. Tell me again how you're the good guy." Matt glanced at the photo, his expression unreadable, then met Kimmel's eyes. "You think a picture tells the whole story? You're pathetic, Jimmy. I was at a hospital that night sitting with a friend who didn't make it. You want to use that against me? Go ahead. Show everyone who you really are." The crowd fell silent, the weight of Matt's words sinking in. Kimmel's hand shook, the photo slipping from his fingers, as the studio became a battlefield of truth and spite, with Matt standing tall. The fallen photo lay on the stage, a silent accusation that had backfired on Jimmy Kimmel. Matt Damon stood, firm, his gaze unwavering while the audience's silence was deafening, their shock at Matt's revelation about his friend's death settling over the studio like a heavy fog. Kimmel, his face pale, scrambled to regain control, but his voice cracked as he spoke. "You expect us to believe that? You're just making excuses, Matt, like you always do." The words were weak, desperate, and the crowd stirred, their murmurs turning to boos aimed at Kimmel. Matt's voice was calm but razor-sharp. "Excuses? I don't need to make excuses for doing what was right. You're the one who needs to explain why you're attacking me for it." The audience clapped, their support for Matt a wall Kimmel couldn't break. Kimmel's eyes darted to the crowd, his confidence crumbling under their disapproval. He forced a laugh, but it was hollow, his hands shaking as he pointed at Matt. "You're good at this, aren't you? Turning everyone against me. Always the victim, never the one who's wrong." Matt stepped closer, his voice low and fierce. "Victim? I'm not playing that card, Jimmy. I'm calling you out for being a bully who can't handle the truth." The crowd roared, their cheers shaking the room, but Kimmel wasn't backing down. He slammed his hand on the desk, his voice rising to a shout. Truth? You wouldn't know truth if it hit you in the face. You're a liar, Damon, and I'm done with your act. The accusation was wild, unhinged, and the audience gasped, sensing Kimmel was losing his grip. Matt's jaw tightened, but he didn't shout back. He leaned forward, his words deliberate, each one landing like a punch. You're done? Good, because I'm done letting you twist my life for your cheap shots. You want to talk about liars? Look in the mirror, Jimmy. You've built your whole career on tearing people down. The crowd erupted, their applause thunderous, as Kimmel's face twisted with rage. He stepped around the desk, closing the distance, his voice a snarl. You think you can lecture me? I've been in this game longer than you and I know how it works. You're nothing without your fans, and I'll make sure they see you for what you are. Matt didn't flinch, his voice steady. Go ahead, try. They're smarter than you think. They know who's real and who's just bitter. The stage felt like a powder keg, every word pushing the fight closer to explosion. A producer signaled frantically from the sidelines, but Kimmel ignored them, his obsession with winning blinding him. He turned to the audience, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You hear this guy? Thinks he's a saint. Who's buying it? Come on, let's hear it. But the crowd didn't cheer. A few scattered claps died quickly, and a lone voice shouted, Leave Matt alone! Kimmel's smile vanished, his plan collapsing. Matt seized the moment, his voice rising with conviction. You've spent years hiding behind jokes, Jimmy, but this isn't funny anymore. You crossed a line, and you know it. The audience clapped, their support a tidal wave, as Kimmel's shoulders slumped, his defiance fading. But Kimmel wasn't finished. In a last-ditch effort, he grabbed the microphone, his voice trembling with anger. You want to play hero? Fine. But I'm not the only one who remembers how you act when the cameras are off. You're not perfect, Matt. Matt's eyes blazed, but he didn't take the bait. Nobody's perfect, Jimmy, but I don't pretend to be something I'm not. Can you say the same? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the crowd cheered, their loyalty cemented. Kimmel stood frozen, the microphone limp in his hand, as the fight shifted decisively in Matt's favor, the truth cutting deeper than any insult. Jimmy Kimmel stood alone in the center of the stage, the microphone dangling in his hand, his face a mix of fury and defeat. Matt Damon, still standing tall, looked out at the audience, their cheers a steady roar that drowned out the last of Kimmel's accusations. The studio felt charged, the air alive with the weight of a battle won not by shouts, but by truth. Kimmel's eyes flicked to Matt, searching for a way to claw back control, but the crowd's support was a wall he couldn't climb. Matt's final question, about Kimmel's own pretense, lingered unanswered, and the host's silence was louder than any comeback. Matt shook his head, his voice firm but calm. You're out of moves, Jimmy. You pushed too far and you lost. Kimmel's lip curled, his voice a low growl. Lost? You think you've won because they're clapping for you? This isn't over, Damon. But his words were empty, and the audience knew it. Their boos rolled over him, sharp and unforgiving, as Matt raised a hand, quieting them. It's over when you stop lying about me, he said, his tone cutting. You wanted a fight, you got one, but I'm not here to play your game. Kimmel laughed, a brittle sound, and tossed the microphone onto the desk. My game? You're the one acting like a martyr. Get off your high horse. Matt's eyes flashed, but he didn't rise to the bait. High horse? I'm just a guy. Who's tired of your nonsense? You're the one who made this personal. The crowd erupted again, their applause a wave that lifted Matt and buried Kimmel. A woman in the front row stood, shouting, We love you, Matt! And others joined her, their voices a chorus of loyalty. Kimmel's face twisted, his plan to humiliate Matt now a public failure. He turned away, pacing to the edge of the stage, but there was no escape. Matt took a step forward, his voice rising with conviction. "You thought you could break me, Jimmy, but you forgot something. I don't bend for people like you. I stand up, and I keep going." The audience cheered louder, their energy shaking the room, as Kimmel spun back, his voice a desperate shout. "Keep going? You'll crash one day, and I'll be there to laugh." Matt's smile was cold, unyielding. "Laugh all you want, but you're laughing alone. These people see you for what you are. A guy who tears others down because he can't build himself up." The words were a final blow, and Kimmel flinched, his shoulders sagging. The producer, now at the stage's edge, signaled for the show to end, but Matt wasn't done. He turned to the audience, his voice steady and strong. "Thank you for standing with me. This movie I came to talk about, it's for people who fight, who don't give up. That's who I'm here for, not for this." He gestured at Kimmel, dismissing him without a glance, and the crowd roared their approval. Kimmel stood frozen, the fight drained from him as the cameras panned to Matt, who walked to the stage's edge, shaking hands with fans in the front row. The audience's cheers followed him, a tide of support that carried him through the studio doors. Kimmel, left behind, stared at the empty desk, his grudge exposed as petty and cruel. The show cut to black, but the story was clear. Matt Damon had faced a bully and won, not with anger, but with honesty and strength. The audience left buzzing, their faith in Matt unshaken, while Kimmel's reputation took a hit he'd feel for years. Matt's triumph was complete, a victory for truth, over spite, and the world would remember who stood tallest when the dust settled.